This is Charlie Rose.
Bill Gates is here. He is Microsoft's co-founder and co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. His latest mission is to invent our way out of the climate change challenge. He's gathered investors to put billions into clean energy research and development. The group known as the Breakthrough Energy Coalition has dozens of members that span the globe. They include Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and Jack Ma. A parallel public sector effort called Mission Innovation commits government to double their funding. The initiatives were announced in November at the Climate Summit in Paris, where 195 countries reached a landmark agreement to lower greenhouse gas emissions. I am pleased to have Bill Gates back at this table. Welcome.
Thank you.
I've read the shareholder letter, which will be released tonight right after this show. Here's what's interesting to me. It seems to me, with all the concentration on the foundation that you've done, all the great things that have taken place in terms of poverty and health, two things have sort of come out of it in watching your curiosity. One is agriculture and your understanding of how crucial agriculture was. And second is energy. So you posed this question. If you could have a superpower, what would it be? And you could include anything. You could think about being able to defy gravity. You could think about being able to see through walls. You could think about everything. But you said what?
I said energy. That getting energy for everyone would transform their life as much as anything I could think of. The idea of flipping a light switch and the lights come on, or setting the temperature and it's hot or cold, if you went to somebody in Africa who doesn't have energy and said that was possible, it would seem as bizarre as somebody flying or seeing through walls. It really is a type of superpower. Americans have the equivalent of 200 humans, pushing an axle on their behalf so that their lights light up and their materials get made and their food gets made. It's that much. Modern life is that much about energy intensity.
In fact, you show two things that are interesting to me. One is you show a global map of the world, and you show Africa at night, and the parts of Africa are almost dark. The extraordinary thing to read your letter is that 1.3 billion people, 18% of the population, do not have electricity.
In Africa, unless we do better than the current expectation, 80% of the people without electricity will be in Africa 30 years from now. So they haven't progressed that much. And when you go there at night, Melinda and I were in the suburbs of Lagos driving along. It's eerie because all the lighting is people burning things in big oil barrels. And so you think, well, this is like some strange movie, not a normal city at all.
The goal coming out for you and for others is to cut greenhouse gases by 80% by 2050.
Yeah. As long as you're emitting greenhouse gases, CO2 in particular, it stays in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. Not all of it, but most of it. The rest of it tends to go either back into the soils or into the ocean, which then you have acidification problems. But that long residence time in the atmosphere means that as long as you're increasing CO2, as long as emissions are above zero, then you have a positive warming trend. And that warming trend is what creates the strange weather and causes crops not to go as well. And particularly if you're in equatorial regions, you're getting up to heat levels that plants and humans do very poorly at. Ironically, as you go into the northern latitudes, there's actually a net benefit there. But a lot of humanity, particularly the poorest, live in the area where the heat will cause terrible problems.
But the majority of the world's energy is produced by fossil fuels.
That's right, overwhelmingly. And if you take the forecast that's made that doesn't assume some incredible innovation, that's going to continue for the next 40 years. The very responsible forecast on the path that we're on today is that we won't be able to make a change away from that.
Unless we do what?
Well, innovation to me is the answer to most problems, including energy. And so I think of India as paradigmatic, that because they don't have electricity, they're collecting firewood that's destroying their environment. The women are breathing smoke, and the children, and they get respiratory diseases. It's awful for their health, even if they survive. They don't have lights at night to read. They can't keep fresh food cold, so they don't get enough protein in their diet. There's every reason why India should have electricity. It's great for their people. Unfortunately, their straightforward path to get there is coal, and yet India is big enough, it's enough people, that if they go down that straightforward path, we won't meet any of our climate change goals. And yet today, we have no alternative that's even close to as cheap, including reliability, which is always a fundamental characteristic of energy systems. You cannot power India as cheaply with the other things as you can with coal. And so only through innovation can you square the circle and say, should India electrify as fast as it can, or should India avoid greenhouse gas emission, which even if they go the full coal route, they won't have emitted as much CO2 per person as we have for more than 100 years.
Is this your biggest passion today?
It's the long lead time thing that requires so much coordination, and science and politics kind of come together. I'm very fascinated by it. I've still got polio eradication
We'll get to that.
And our health stuff as the things where I feel like, gosh, we're on track. We know what to do. This one is in the category of great importance, and if you wait 20 years to get started, then the time it takes to invent, the time it takes to change the system, you're really going to miss the window on it. So it's got a funny kind of urgency, even though the damage in the next 20 or 30 years is not that dramatic.
But you got to get it started.
Absolutely.
You know, and you believe you can get to zero by the beginning of the next century.
I believe that innovation, there are so many paths, over a dozen different paths, and we only need one of them to work to give us this cheap, reliable energy that, yes, then you have to deploy that and get to these what are wildly ambitious goals.
And talking about innovation, I mean, what's interesting to you, you talk about an energy miracle. What would that be?
Well, anything that's half the price of today's energy, cheaper than coal, and totally reliable, doesn't depend on the wind blowing or the sun shining, that's an energy miracle. So, for example, if you could take sunlight and directly make gasoline from sunlight, that's called solar fuels, and there are scientists who can do that. Now, it's about 100 times less efficient than it needs to be to make any sense. And so that one isn't even ready for a startup company. That one still needs to be in the government labs getting basic research funding, 3 or 4 times what it's getting today. And then, with luck, it'll get to the point where companies will get started and high-risk, high-return investors will come along.
So you're looking for a miracle. But what you want to do now, is to enlist both private funding, which you started, and Jeff is in this and others are in this. At the same time, you want to make sure the government has a role.
That's right. Basic research
because of scale.
Is their unique role is basic research. The universities, the national labs, you're not going to get private investors to fund the level of research because that's just the very beginning, material science, stronger magnets, tensile strength, things that will be critical. Just like in the medical sector, there's a great pharmaceutical industry, but the U.S. government spends $30 billion a year on basic health research, and it's been fantastic for the country. It's been fantastic for the world. In energy, we're down at less than $6 billion, and so that's the number that I'm hoping, and the commitment was made in Paris by 20 governments, including the United States, to double their energy R&D over a 5-year period. And that will raise the supply of innovation and make it ripe for these amazing group of investors.
Now, the stockholders, this letter to the foundation letter, Who's it addressed to? Because I had the impression you're addressing this to high school students.
Right. That's a new thing for us. The two themes, the energy, which I elaborate on, and Melinda talks about time and how women have to spend lots of extra time, more than men do in the household, and dramatically
Melinda
more.
writes about this.
Right. A kid in a high school newspaper in Appalachia, Kentucky, great high school, Betsy Lane High School, asked us about superpowers, and she said time, I said energy. And that, as we talked about it, really pointed out to us that those are such basic things about the experience of poor people. And even in the U.S., people can appreciate how important energy is, and there's still a time imbalance. So those became the theme, and yet these are not problems that there's some 10-year solution to. So the younger generation, their voice, their willingness to look at things in new ways, I hope the invention takes place, and I expect it will in the next 15 years. So today's teenagers will be in their 20s, and a lot of the wild thinking that drives innovation comes from that group.
What are the three crazy ideas you think might have potential?
Well, I've mentioned this idea of sun being used to generate fuels, and that's unique because unlike generating electricity, where batteries that store electricity are super expensive and don't last very long, storing gasoline in a big gasoline tank, you just make the tank bigger and it can sit there for as long as you want. When you want the energy, you just burn it, and it's very dense. It's 10 times more dense in energy content than the best batteries that we have today. So that really would be special. Taking nuclear energy and overcoming a number of problems, the cost of the plants, the safety of the plants, where people worry, will you have another Fukushima or even Chernobyl-type accident? That is another path that we could go down. We could take wind that's way up in the jet stream and capture that. Now, that requires materials that are ultra strong, which would be valuable for many things. I mean, you could build bridges that would last forever, and we're really on the verge of that type of understanding. There are two approaches that people think about. One is that you could just take solar and wind and make them really cheap, and that's probably not too hard. But then you could have a battery that's like 10 or 20 times better than any battery we have today.
What is so difficult about finding better batteries?
Well, the problem is that it's chemistry, and the number of charges you can put into an area, those rules, there's not like some semiconductor thing that lets us just jam those things in. And what happens, you're going between a liquid phase and a solid phase. And as you do that, the solid tends to degrade. And so if batteries could last, instead of 400 cycles of charge-discharge, if they could last 4,000, that really changes the economics. And there are ideas along those lines. I have money in many battery companies, and there's a bunch that I don't. But I'd say all of them are having a tough time, because proving that something doesn't degrade in some physical way over 4,000 cycles, it's not something you can test overnight. It's very pragmatic stuff. And so batteries in the last 100 years haven't improved as much as we would need them to make this the path we go down. Now, that is a very possible path. We should invest in both the research and companies along that path. But that's the one most people think is going to come, and it's not as easy as they think.
Well, 50 years?
You can't put a time on it. The only reason I'm confident is if you take 12 paths, nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, the battery thing we just talked about, solar chemicals, there's a total of about 12, including the burning hydrocarbons and capturing the carbon from the flue, from the chimney stack. That's another one. If you have 5 companies on each of these, so 60 total, and they get the basic research backing them up and they get the risk capital, even if individually they're only 20% likely, if you pursue those 60 different things, then in aggregate, the chance of a success is very high, and that's what I think we should do.
Two questions before we turn to health and other things you're doing. Number one, where have climate deniers gained strength, or are they what? Where would you put that component of our population?
The problem of climate denial is not a huge problem outside the United States. And so,
why is that?
That's a good question. The policymakers on many issues, like agricultural crops called GMOs, right. Europe is more skeptical of right. the science on that than the U.S. is.
Right.
On climate change, we are uniquely skeptical, particularly in terms of telling policymakers, hey, look askance at that. And there's another group that's a little bit of a problem, which is people who believe that climate's a problem, but think that it's easy to solve.
Yeah.
And so that, okay, hey, as soon as the utility guys don't stand in the way of rooftop solar, this thing is solved, not just for the U.S., but for the entire world, not just for the power sector, but for transport, industry, home, everything we need. That notion that there are simple solutions also stands in the way.
But is that inhibiting forward progress?
Until the 2015 November talks, the idea of improving the amount of innovation, increasing R&D actually was not discussed. And I'm, still kind of amazed at that. The 20 countries did commit there. That's good.
Including China.
Including China, India, all the big ones that you'd want to. Even India, all made the doubling commitment. We've always put a lot of money into the demand side for clean energy. We have tax credits. We have what are called renewable portfolio standards, where utilities are required to buy a certain percentage of their energy from these renewable sources. And so if you take the effective payments, the increased price of electricity and tax forgiveness, we put a lot into that demand side, and so is Germany and Japan and others. We need to have a balance where we're also driving the supply of innovation as well.
Let me turn to what we've been experiencing recently. Everybody's talking about the Zika virus. I mean, you looked hard at Ebola. Tell me where you see this and what's necessary. And what did we learn from the Ebola crisis?
Well, in the case of Ebola, the orchestration of the resources, the private sector's ability to make diagnostics and antibodies and drugs and vaccines, that was pulled together very slowly. And there was no roadmap for if we're moving quickly, what's our liability? What is the regulatory path for these things? If there's 3 or 4 companies working on it, which ones have the best one and should go twice as fast? Which one should drop out? That was chaotic. And only now do we have these good Ebola tools, which if that had spread a lot faster, we would have felt terrible about that. Zika is, of course, different. It's spread by mosquitoes, not by human-human contact. And there's still a lot of measurement being done to understand, is there some narrow part of your pregnancy where you can be affected? Is it required that you also had dengue at some point? But it's a bad situation. It was great that the emergency was declared. This time, understanding how we can all sit down, figure out the private sector innovations that could come in, and including, in this case, killing mosquitoes, because this particular mosquito, Aedes aegypti, lives in urban areas, mostly around the equator. And one of the great heroes of global health from long ago, Frank Soper, said we should wipe out this particular type of mosquitoes, and he came very close to it. And now we sort of wish, geez, maybe that would have been a good thing. This mosquito carries dengue, Zika, chikungunya, and historically, most important was yellow fever.
Yellow fever. So you have said, I think, that mosquitoes are the most dangerous animal on Earth.
That's right. In terms of what kills the most humans? Do humans kill the most humans? Do lions? Do sharks? The humans killing humans is a strong number 2, but unless war gets extreme in some year, the 600,000 plus kids who die of malaria, which is a mosquito-caused death, that is the animal that generates the most mortality.
And malaria?
It's all malaria. Yeah. There's a few others, but malaria is 95% of it.
So what should we do about the mosquito?
There are a couple of ideas for changing the mosquito that we've been funding in order to work on dengue and malaria. One idea is that you actually put a bacteria called Wolbachia into the mosquito. Wolbachia into the mosquito, and then it doesn't carry the parasite hardly at all. So we've done field trials on that, and it appears that also does work for. It works for dengue. It appears it also works for Zika. So that may get rolled out more quickly. An even more powerful tool that spreads faster but more controversial is to take our new gene editing technology that people call CRISPR and have male and female mosquitoes pass along either something that prevents them from carrying the virus or something that kills the progeny. Those are both approaches. But you use gene editing and create a thing called gene drive, which means that all of your children, both male and female, inherit something, even if only one of your parents have it, that it's dominant into that generation, either to not survive or not carry the bad virus.
If you were coming out of high school today, you've been asked this question before. I've asked you 10 years ago. If you were coming out of high school today, knowing what you know about what's happening in terms of genomics, and just mention gene editing, and at the same time what's going on in technology, which field would you enter?
It's a hard choice nowadays.
Because the other's gotten so much more exciting.
Yeah, the digital stuff in terms of vision and robotics continues to be very exciting. Not without challenges as it moves at full speed, but mostly positive enablement. So that's a wonderful field and will generate tons of jobs that people should want. Biology, all the medical work, is also an incredible thing. Understanding how these genes work, and actually in some cases you're having to use the digital tools to track the genes and understand them.
Absolutely.
There are companies working on robotic assisted surgery that could raise the quality and lower the cost.
Coming together of genomics and technology.
Exactly.
Or digitization.
So we have stem cells, genetics. So the field of biology is so amazing, and if a kid has interest, the chance that they could lead huge breakthroughs is gigantic there. But I also want to, say energy, because we need bright minds to drive all the ideas there as well.
And the minds we may not have access to because of not having energy, they will not have a full development.
Right. Fortunately, that's a great thing. As we uplift more countries, then they get more educated and contribute more. The U.S. leads in science, but countries like China now will also contribute. And
you have mentioned in the letter, and I mentioned again, the idea is clean energy. I mean, it's not just they have energy, but they got to have clean energy.
That's right. The greenhouse gases constraint, it'd be nice if it was only a 20% reduction, but the fact that it's essentially eliminating it from rich country energy systems, that is daunting, but necessary, and that's why all this parallel work is needed.
On the digital side, you mentioned artificial intelligence. I mean, part of that has to do with robots and finding out what does that mean in terms of jobs, and what does it mean in terms of a population that may not have a job, and all those kinds of questions about how we spend leisure time and the rest of that. But there are also things that concern you and concern other people. Just you. What is your concern about artificial intelligence?
In the long run, the scale of the intelligence is unbounded, and nobody knows.
We don't know how smart it could get.
No, it'll get a lot smarter than us. Right. It's so smart that we'll have to ask it, "Hey, how smart are you?" And it will tell us. So the near-term problem that's predictably in the the 20-year time frame is labor substitution, not superintelligence. The superintelligence
labor substitution,
right? Where that's kind of an embarrassment of riches problem, and where you should free up people to help every kid in school, every handicapped kid, every elderly person who's lonely. You should be able to reallocate that. Hey, if you're not needed to work in that warehouse, get out there and do other things.
In a way, this dovetails into what Melinda says about time.
That's right. It'll free up time doing the drudgery things, and so all the things about spending time with the kids and being more connected socially, we should be able to do more of that.
Yeah, she tells a wonderful story in her part of the letter in which she says there was, I guess, a family in Africa, I think, and the wife spent all of her time going to get water and bringing it back. And finally, she's about ready to leave the marriage. And he comes home, and the bags are packed. And he says, "What can I do?" I'm paraphrasing. And she says, "I'm doing all the stuff. I'm doing everything. All the stuff at home. And you need to help me." And he agrees. And so he starts taking the water himself. They split that. And all of a sudden, he gets involved in that, and they determine that there's smarter ways to do this and start collecting rain and doing other things. So they have, her point is freeing up people to have time to participate in all the issues jointly.
Yeah, and that was interesting because when he first helped out, he was ridiculed by the other men.
Exactly.
And he was like, well, no, I'm going to keep doing this. And what they told Melinda was that had set an example for that village. We have a tiny case of that where I was driving, when I was CEO of Microsoft, our children to school quite a bit. And apparently, I don't know for sure, but other wives use that to encourage their husbands that they couldn't say they were too much more busy than I was at that particular time.
Back to artificial intelligence. So, but what's the time frame on this?
For the labor substitution,
immediately,
it will be substantial in the 5 to 20 year period. Warehouse, security, things that the computers used to not be able to see, and we are really good at physical manipulation, making a bed, cleaning up a room, carrying a patient upstairs. The amount of adjustment and ability, it's quite incredible. But once software achieves those things, then it's kind of unbounded. So, like sorting parts in a warehouse, picking things out of a bin, computers are just now getting to human level. The problem is 10 years from now, they'll be at 3 or 4 times the human level, and the humans aren't on that same type of improvement curve. And so it's like farming. It's like saying, oh, tractors are going to destroy the world. Well, because that took generations, people did adjust. Here, the speed, it'll come a little faster. And some people sort of almost don't think it'll happen because we've sort of been saying this would happen before it did happen. And so it's like, oh, yeah, they've been saying that. It's true. We cried wolf, 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 wolf. And next thing we know, there's a damn wolf.
There's a wolf there. That's right. That's right. But on the more concerning side in terms of intelligence, is there a breakthrough necessary, or is it so underway that it's just time and the accumulation of technological advantages?
I think on the labor piece, hardly any of the experts in the field would disagree that that's coming. On this piece about intelligence, you could get the very best people in the field, and half would say, I don't think that'll ever happen, or I think that'll take forever. I'm amazed that it is not a subject of which there's consensus. And even whether to be afraid of it.
In where you are.
I'm worried about it.
But are you as worried as Elon Musk is?
Yes.
Who says it's more dangerous than nuclear catastrophe?
Well, yes, because
potentially more dangerous than
if this happens, it changes life as we know it. So life has changed for the entire population.
What's that scenario?
That the machine is far more intelligent than
and therefore they control us.
and therefore our sense of purpose and the notion of which humans are in control of it or are humans in control of it will have profound consequences.
And how long before that happens?
No, when people answer that question, they're a little bit guessing. I don't think it'll happen in less than 40 years.
40.
And
40 years?
I can't say for sure it'll happen in less than 100.
40 years is 2056.
Yeah, it's no time at all.
I know.
That's no time at all.
This is in the lifetime of your children.
Right. Even if it's 100 years, the idea that... But the thing about this one is not to panic.
In 50 years, machines are smarter than humans.
Because humans created them, yes.
Well, but if they're smarter, then they will determine the future of the world, not...
Are the humans who control them.
Or the humans who control them. Because humans can decide what goes in and what comes out.
Well, certainly the likely case to start out with is there'll be some subset of humans who control those machines.
And who are they?
The private sector is doing more state-of-the-art artificial intelligence work than the public sector. Then companies are talking about this.
The great advances, including the internet, came out of the Defense Department.
The early stage, yes. And then it had contractors like BBN, and then eventually the infrastructure's done on the private side. The IT revolution has largely moved to be private sector funded.
Exactly. I understand that now, but it started there, and you're saying it's no longer happening there in terms of artificial intelligence. It's all in the private sector.
The best stuff is in the private sector now.
And what I'm finding out is that people who are, hedge funds and a lot of other people in venture capital are pouring money into it because they believe it's going to unlock some kind of future.
Right. And even if you focus on it as a narrow thing like, hey, what stock should I trade? You may be creating a general capacity for intelligence.
Well, there's a lot of that now, even.
Right.
As you would know.
So it's a thing that we ought to, the discussion and debate ought to begin. It's not like banning that research would be a good move, because that just pushes it to less visible locations.
Speaking of a public debate that ought to begin, let's talk about security versus privacy, encryption, Apple, the FBI, and the federal government. Where do you stand?
Well, it would be valuable if the safeguards that the government had in terms of the information it was acquiring, when it would go for that information, how it would deal with it, that people felt comfortable with that. Because if government is blind, then things like tax evasion, child pornography, and perhaps most importantly, terrorism enabled by nuclear biological weapons, then our government isn't able to fulfill some role of stopping those things.
Right.
And so it's great that people are talking more, post Snowden and everyone, about how do you feel about those safeguards. If we can't as a society discuss those safeguards and build them in a way that we feel good about, then government won't be able to fulfill its function.
So therefore, if you're responsible for the decision as to whether Apple should allow the government one time only to come in and provide in their labs software so the government can then try to have access, are you in favor of that? Are you in favor of a private company, in this circumstance, Apple, in the secrets of their own lab, and they're being able to destroy whatever they create after they do this for the government one time only? Should they do that?
Well, in every case up till now, when the government's come in and said, what's the banking information? Banks like to keep their customers' information private, but no bank has ever defied the government. I think Apple, at the end, they're just forcing a complete judicial process. I don't think anyone from Apple is saying that when the court, say it goes to the Supreme Court. I don't think they're saying they'll defy the government.
No, they're not.
They're just forcing.
But they are saying that right now they're not going to do it, so it'll be appealed to an district court, appeals court, and the Supreme Court. I'm just asking you, what would you do if you were the executive? Would you do the same thing that Tim Cook has done?
I think they're saying, hey, as a society, we think this discussion of safeguards is important. I don't disagree with that. I think at the end of the day...
Nobody disagrees with that.
At the end of the day, we want a government that has visibility, and we trust it to use that visibility on our behalf. That's where, in order to stop innovation in biological weaponry from being turned against humanity, you really need governments to have a role of trust.
To have access.
Now, historically, governments, the FBI in some cases, and they haven't always earned that trust. But I claim it's important for the public that we figure out what structure would put us back into a situation where the U.S. government has the safeguards and we do trust it, so that if the courts rule against Apple on this, we're not saying that's a terrible
I still do
thing.
not understand what you would do, and you are as versed in all this as anybody I know.
The only choice that Apple has is whether to comply with the lower court or wait for the higher court ruling. They've chosen to wait for the higher court ruling, which over time I expect the government will decide not to be blind, and it will exercise its sovereign power not to be blind. But there will have been a debate about what visibility it should have.
Are you okay with Tim Cook waiting until it walks its way through the judicial process? Or is it possible to do a one-time only, in this case, of this one computer and this one iPhone that belonged to a terrorist?
Well, Apple agrees it is possible. But
they do agree.
But by doing so, it proves that they can do so. But they've already admitted they can do so.
Right.
They can do so. Your bank can take your banking information and give it to the U.S. government. They have that ability. Your phone company can take your phone calls and give it to the U.S. government. Now
but they have an encrypted iPhone that does not allow them to do that. That's false. The information that the government is seeking is not in the security processor. And the logic about challenging the security processor with the PIN is not in the security processor. So anyway, there's not a technological question here. What is the question?
The question is, what will the final court rule on this issue? That's really the only question.
Okay, but I mean, why is it so hard to get you to say yay or nay? Because most of Silicon Valley is supporting what Apple is doing, and not on the idea that we want to wait and see what a judicial body says. They're saying we don't think that the government should be able to
a discussion about
access an encrypted phone. And Apple says we don't know how to do it, but now we know they do know how to do it.
Right. And the endorsing the idea of all the government's behavior with accessing information in the past, nobody would want to do that, because there are cases where the government overused, more J. Edgar Hoover is, I think, more clear.
Absolutely.
And so the idea that you're forcing the discussion about, gosh, what would it mean if you can't trust the government ever to get banking information or call information or iPhone information? It'd be great if we could agree on what safeguards would get us back to saying at least this government is working on our behalf when it's trying to track down
Apple
terrorists.
Must have known this was coming, because between iOS 7 and iOS 8, you presented with a very different situation in terms of encrypted phones. Yes or no?
The information on that phone is accessible to Apple.
Right.
If anybody was confused about that, now they're not. That information is accessible to Apple. That's a technological thing,
No, but I mean,
which doesn't really matter.
but
it's
Apple's
like
been-
your bank saying, oh, we can't possibly access your account information. Your bank can, and they can resist court orders if they choose to as well.
I mean, this is a hard case, I assume, because of terrorism. Because, I mean, there's no violation of... I mean, the person who had the phone, the two people are dead.
Right. So the issue is the precedential fact. Is this a government who safeguards information appropriately and will use this revealed capability in an appropriate way? And that's
why you have judicial standards, is it not?
And
that's why you have to go to the court to do it.
Democracy that
Yes.
sits in debates about what should the Patriot Act version 1, 2, 3, 4 look like, and the Congress could decide that government never gets to see bank accounts, they never get to see travel records, they never get to see anything.
But
that's
Congress
all
has not
political.
acted.
The statutes that are in question here were enacted by the United States Congress. Turns out they're using one that's from a long time ago. But eventually, as it has been with the Patriot Act, this will all be subject to democratic discussion.
But
it won't be corporations in the end, although they can talk to congressmen just like everyone else.
I don't understand this. This is the one thing I don't understand, and you can help me understand it. Obviously, Apple knows that they can do it if they're directed to do it, all the way up to Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says the law of the land is you have to do it. No, they will in the end do it. They say they're fighting it because there's no such thing as a one-time only fix. That if, in fact, they do this for the government, that all the people who have bought iPhones under the assumption that they were protected, that they will come after them. I had Cy Vance, a district attorney here in New York, say to me, I've got 120 cases in which it's about encrypted data in an iPhone. And every one of them I would like to see opened up because it would be evidentiary important to me. Apple says, China, we sold those phones. People bought those phones because they thought they would be safe from challenge. And now they believe that you can't have a one-time only solution here, that in fact, if Apple does this, that what their business model was about, what their marketing was about, what their relationship with their customers was about will be voided. Are they right or wrong?
They can access this information.
I know you've said that 3 times. I know that. So but they're saying if they access it for this case, then everything that we have
just like your bank, just like your phone company, that's right. Anyone who says they can override a sovereign, may in the end not be able to do that.
Now, here's an easy question. How is Microsoft different?
All the tech companies are insisting that the government have really formal orders for anything that they do. They are, no tech company is ever going to volunteer information.
Understand.
There's still some discretion about do you force it to go through the whole court process. But the basic view of the tech industry is the government. This is a political decision about when governments can access information and what those safeguards look like. And I'd say the tech companies are for good reasons and saying, hey, let's really have this debate about safeguards, because in the digital world, the amount of information about your behavior that's somewhere
already there
is larger. Now, in some cases, like in London, where they have cameras, they've dropped crime rates and various things. Is that okay? Well, in the UK, they've decided that the net benefit of that is them, and countries are going to have different rules about these things.
Okay, I'm asking this because I'm trying to fully understand this. Cook said that they have asked us to build a back door. Is that what the government's asking? A back door?
In the same way that when the bank looks up bank account information, they have to type the password in.
Right.
In this case, the password is a piece of code that says allow an arbitrary number of pins to be entered. So yes, Apple has to do something, just like the bank has to do something.
And that's an interesting part of this. They are asking Apple to do something, too.
Just like they ask a bank to type in the account number and print the thing out.
And deliver us the documents.
Yeah, that's doing something.
Max Levchin, who you and I both know and admire, said that Apple, this is what I'm trying to get you to say, i.e. one side or the other. Apple should offer the FBI the exact data, but they should not offer them a master key.
Yeah, that would solve this particular case.
And is that what they should do then? Offer this exact data, but not a master key?
The only discretion Apple has is whether to go through this whole judicial process or not. And I'm not going to sit here and say, no, they should stop right now and not go through the judicial process, because I do view the discussion about, hey, isn't the government on our side? Wait a minute, why are some people so reluctant for the government to have access? And what does it mean about, there's quite a variety of governments, what does it mean about that?
Yeah. And you value your own privacy.
Sure.
And so do I.
But the notion that of what is absolutely inaccessible or not, people also should, be kind of educated about that.
I want to talk about some other things too. You've said some really fun things that you talked about the role that music has played in your life. And you talked about the fact that when you got married, Melinda loved Willie Nelson, and Willie Nelson was there. You talked about not one. So, and I think you did the thing in London on a desert isle. Did you?
Exactly.
And what did you choose as the music that you would bring to the island?
Well, there's a Willie Nelson song that I had him sing when he came down by surprise, which is called Blue Skies.
Oh, yeah. But he came by surprise. She didn't know he was coming.
No, I gave her that surprise, and she did a custom spoof version of The Economist, where all my friends wrote articles. Was her equivalent gift to me.
You also talked about Richard Feynman as sort of the teacher that you most might have loved to have had. We all know him because of the spaceship disaster, when he kind of figured it out. What was it great about him?
He was so tough on himself in terms of whether he understood things, that he understood physics in a deep way. And so his lectures explaining physics that he gave in the 1960s, I still consider the best way for somebody to learn why physics is interesting, and why it was confusing, and how they straighten themselves out, and what it means to run experiments. And
he was at Caltech, wasn't he?
This lecture series was at Columbia. Then he goes to Caltech, and he does the most grueling freshman physics course ever done, that even he thinks, man, I made it too hard for them. And that leads to the textbook called The Feynman Lectures on Physics, which it's a high bar to read those, but they're extremely well written. If you want to test your physics knowledge or refresh it, there's nothing better to read.
Did you read them?
Yes, but slowly. It's the slowest thing I've ever read.
Do you really regret not learning a foreign language?
I feel like some isolationist, lazy person.
Then why didn't you? Lazy you are not.
I got fanatic about software and kept putting it off. And still to this day, I'm hoping to get around to it. French is easy enough that I should just do that. Now, Mark Zuckerberg went and learned Chinese, gave a lecture,
and answered questions from the Chinese.
He did it. And my Chinese-speaking friends say it was very, very impressive. So, hey.
There's still time.
I'm envious.
50-something.
No, I should do it.
And he's 30.
Not Chinese, though. I'm too much of a wimp.
I saw something the other day where you acknowledged that you had hacked into computers.
Yes. That was between age 14 and 16. We had limited access to computer time, and so the only way...
This was at school or the library somewhere?
Yeah, there were time-sharing systems. Computers were super expensive, and so people used phone lines to dial into a big, expensive computer, and you'd have like 50 people all dialed in at the same time. That's, computer time was rare and scarce, and, I knew where on the university there were a few computers, and I'd get up at 5 in the morning and go, and if they had a half hour free, I'd go and use it. And in a few cases, we figured out how to get onto computers that we wouldn't generally have been given access to.
Software is a second love of your life, isn't it?
I was obsessed with software from a very young age. So, yes, my 10,000 hours was devoted to learning how to write software.
And was that your core competence, writing software?
Yeah, math helped me learn software.
And you love math.
And then I got so deep in software that it later helped me with math. But the thing you do obsessively between age 13 and 18, that's the thing you have the most chance of being world class at. And I only have one thing that I did obsessively from 13 to 18, and that's try to write good software.
Try to write good software. Did you write good software?
Well, it was fascinating. I thought I was really good. And then when I was 15, I got to work on this project, and I realized, oh, this guy's better than me, and he critiqued me. And then that happened a year and a half later, and I got critiqued again, and I thought, oh, no, this is better. And so that was super helpful to have my comeuppance about, okay, how did my code compare to other people's code? And then eventually I was a bit on my own. But, yeah, I had to be pretty tough about how good can you get?
Yeah, but my impression of you is that you did pretty much what you wanted to as a teenager. I mean,
after age 13,
that's when teenage begins.
I had my parents were reasonable, and they were fairly busy. I had a very good deal as a teenager.
Yes, you did.
They sent me to a private school. There were lots of smart kids there.
Didn't they send you to a therapist, too?
Yeah, well, that was when that was my real transition, where I was thinking that fighting with them was something that I could really prove something, and they were smart enough to send me to somebody who said that was kind of a war that I had every advantage in, and so it's just a waste of my energy, and I wasn't really going to prove anything because it was almost unfair. And he got me to set my sights on, okay, what am I going to do after high school? And my parents really were more of allies than my barriers in terms of thinking of that framework. And so he encouraged reading in areas that I hadn't done, like Freud and psychology.
So what are you reading now that you really like? Because you write these book reports, and it is said that you read 2 or 3 books a week.
I try to. I end up on average reading 1 a week. I just finished *Sapiens*, which is quite good. I read this one that's only for old men called *Younger Next Year*, which is...
What did you learn from that?
It really beats you up about, don't kid yourself. If you don't exercise like mad and eat well, you are in decay. Right. But on the other side, it says until your 80s, if you exercise 6 days a week and eat reasonably, nothing heroic, then your decline from age 60 to, say, 85, with any luck, will be very, very modest, because you're telling your body to maintain your bone strength, your muscle strength. So I found it very helpful.
And you're listening to that advice?
I've never done strength training, and it says you need to do that twice a week. And so I've taken a vow to do it, but ask me next time I'm here whether that was taken. I've done 0 days of strength training as of today, so you can see what the result is. If I come in looking buff, you'll know that this book had a profound impact on my behavior.
But you write these book reports, and you say you read the books even though you may not like them, but you finish the books you don't like.
Yes, I don't give myself
in the margins and all that.
I don't give myself permission not to finish a book.
It's great to have you here.
Thanks.
Bill Gates for the Hour. Thank you for joining us. See you next time. For more about this program and early episodes, visit us online at pbs.org and charlierose.com.